Hello, my name is Elliot Brown. A while back I had this idea, which, no, it's not original. The intent here is to create a series of educational videos that help people explore possibilities for things that they may not have before. In these, we're going to do some interesting scientific experiments on one hand. We're also going to build some cool stuff. The goal here is to come away having learned something. What it is, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know if we're going to succeed. What I do know is that for those watching this in the future, I started this project in the year 2020, which, if you're not aware, was perhaps one of the most embarrassing years in American history, especially modern American history. You know, we started the year with a pandemic, the coronavirus, that really restricted what people could do. So this hobby was born out of being locked in my home for months on end with not much else going on. However, all that aside, these are going to be, I think, fun little projects. I'm starting with a simple one to get myself into the groove, because I will confess, it is unusual talking into a video camera instead of to a person. However, trying to make it work. Not something I'm used to, not something I ever do, right? So, we're going to see how this goes. We're going to see if we can have a little fun along the way. I have quite a few things lined up, prepared, projects and, experiments and other nonsensical things. We need to build some things for some of them. So we're going to have, I hope we're going to have a really good time. In the process of coming up with this, one of the hardest things I think was naming it. I actually already have a business named partially after myself, which is conceited, I know. So I think I'm going to go with a variant off of that. I think for the future, I'm going to call this the Ellersoft Educational Video Series or Network. I'm not sure. We'll see. Either way, I think we're going to have a good time here. I think we're going to become really good friends. So as I hinted earlier, we're going to build things for some of our experiments. Today's project I picked specifically because it's simple, it's lightweight, it's something I can do in a very short period. It'll get me in the groove of kind of getting used to, and it's something that, you may have a need to know how to do in the future, right? If you're like me and you have, semi-limited garage and you don't have a lot of space, there are some tools you're going to be lacking along the way. In this episode, we're going to overcome one of those limitations. Now, I may have a lot of stuff, but one of the things I don't have is something called a wood turning machine or a lathe. These are devices designed to put a piece of, in most cases, at least the cases I would need, wood, but you can also get them in machining sizes to do steel, aluminum, stainless. They're devices designed to put a part on and spin it with some degree of precision. I don't have one of those. It's not something I would use a lot, so I'm not going to go out and buy one, right? Because they're kind of expensive. However, we're going to overcome that limitation today. One of the things we'll need for a future episode, I hope, is a wheel. A relatively semi-precise wheel. It's not going to be anything fancy. It's just going to be made out of 3/4 inch plywood. But we're going to need a wheel. Today, we're going to invent a wheel. The process to do so, if you don't have a wood turning machine, is a little more difficult. If we had one, this would be I'd throw it on there, I'd spin it up real quick, I'd take probably a chisel, grind it down to the size I needed, take a piece of sandpaper, rub it down, smooth it off. We don't have that, so what we're going to do is a two-step process effectively. We're going to cut a wheel, close enough wheel with a hole saw, and then we're going to spin it with a drill. The process to do so is actually rather simple. So step one today in our process of building the wheel, reinventing the wheel, if you wanted a dad pun, is to cut a wheel that's kind of close with a hole saw. For those who aren't aware, a hole saw is just a circular saw that punches a hole through lumber. In my case, I have a whole kit of hole saws, various sizes. Today, the one I used, I'm actually not sure the size of. Let me look real quick. But I already cut this wheel, and I feel guilty about that because I should have waited until I did a video to do it. So this says 76 millimeter, I think. I don't know. I hope so. Either way, not important. I needed all my wheels to be the same size. I know which hole saw I used for that, so we're good there. I think this may be a 3-inch hole saw. I have a tape around here. I could look, but I'm too lazy. And that's not important. The important point is to cut a wheel, right? To cut a disc out of a piece of lumber. In this case, it was a cabinet I built to put a stereo system on. I punched this out of the side so I could route all my cables through it and throw a grommet in there that makes it look nice and pretty, right? So we have part of a wheel. Now the thing here is that this wheel is not smooth. It's rough around the edges. It hasn't been, I just splintered myself. That's how rough it is. It hasn't been cleaned up at all. Now, with a wood turning machine, we would clean it up. We would take a chisel probably, or some sort of a piece of metal material, spin this on there, and as we spun it, we would come up to the edge with our piece of material and grind some of it off to clean the edge up a little bit. And then afterwards, we would probably sand it. Today, we're going to skip straight to the sanding part. Now, as I said, first step, cut a wheel, right? Hole saw, through our board. In this case, we see that my wheel fits kind of nice. Well, actually, if I put it the other way, it probably fits kind of nice. Look at that. This thing, perfect, right? So, as we see, in our hole saw, which hopefully my camera refocuses, in our hole saw, my wheel fits nice and tight, which is how it would have when I knocked it out. So, once we've knocked it out comes the hard part. Sort of. In our case, it's actually not going to be that bad. What we're going to use, instead of a wood turning machine, is a standard drill. Mine is battery powered, with a 1/2-inch chuck. You use a 3/8, and a bolt. Now, in my case, I'm going to use a bolt, a nut, and 2 washers, right? Real simple. As I drop them all on the floor. What we're going to do here is actually rather trivial. We're going to stuff our bolt through our hole. In my case, my hole saw drills a hole that fits a 1224 bolt rather nicely and rather tightly, right? We don't want a lot of wiggle room in here. The important thing when we're looking at this is that, there's minimal movement in here, because the tighter this is, the better our rotation is going to go. In my case, I'm actually going to go with a washer on either side because it will allow me to get a little tighter without crunching into the wood as bad. If we didn't use the washers, our bolt would want to kind of grind into our piece of wood. In my case, I don't really want that. That's not my desired effect. Now here, mine is a standard 1224 hex nut. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to take a screwdriver. I'm going to tighten this up real good, right? This needs to be pretty tight, which is why we're using a washer, because it allows us to create a wider area of pressure and not cause as much pain on our part. Next, we're going to take our drill, right? If I were doing this safely, I would have taken the battery out. And we're going to put our bolt in here, and we're going to chuck it up so it's nice and tight. We want it tight so that as it spins, we can get our sander in here, which I don't have mine tight enough, my bolt tight enough. But as it spins, we can get our piece of sandpaper in here, and we can get this cleaned up pretty well, right? So I grabbed a pair of pliers so I can tighten my washer a little better, because I don't want it to spin super freely on our driver. So as we put this in here, which, you know, I could have ground the threads off this bolt and made it my wood turning bolt. Once it's in here, we're going to spin it. We're going to kind of look at it and make sure it's spinning. You know, we want it to be spinning relatively flat, right? If we hold it straight up, we don't want to see a lot of wiggle here, which we don't see much. We've got a little bit on the corners, but that's because this wasn't a perfect piece of plywood. Once we've got it mounted in our drill, the next step is, in my case, I could probably put it in the vise to hold the drill stable. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go that extreme. We're going to take a piece of sandpaper. This was a piece of 60 grit sandpaper I was using on another project that is mostly spent as far as my orbital sander goes. However, it's still good enough that we can sand by hand with it, which is what we're technically doing. In our case, we're going to actually spin our drill and hold our sandpaper on here to grind these edges down. Now before I do that, I'm going to put safety glasses on. I recommend you probably do the same, just because it kind of helps keep dust out of your eyes, which with this we're going to be making a lot of dust. I'm also going to reset the view so that we can kind of see what we're doing a little more clearly. So we'll do that in a moment, and then we'll kind of see how this works and what else we might be able to do with this kind of a setup. So, got my safety glasses on. What we're going to do next is we're going to take our drill, we're going to put it on a flat surface. Doesn't have to be a level surface, right? Because we're doing this by hand. And we're going to take a block, any generic block. I've got a handful around here. I'll go grab one from the back. And we're going to hold our sandpaper with our block. The purpose of that is, if we use our fingers, we'll have a likelihood to create a groove in our wheel, because our fingers are not flat, right? If you look at your finger, it's kind of curved, right? And it seems, you know, it seems like you could work around that pretty well, but in my experience, historically, at least with me, I'm not super great at that. I can't drill straight holes. I can't sand flat. I need tools to do those things for me, right? So we're going to, in our case, use a block. It's going to be a small block, just a piece of scrap lumber I've got. But we're going to take the block and we're going to hold the sandpaper with the block. The purpose of that is to flatten the sandpaper out so that as we sand with it, we get a nice flat surface on our wheel. Now we're not going to get a perfectly flat wheel out of this because we don't have a wood turning machine. But for our purposes, we don't need a perfect wheel. We just need a kind of close wheel, right? If I knew, you know, the angle of the drill, because it doesn't sit perfectly flat, but if I knew the angle of the drill, I could build, you know, some kind of a jig that would hold, you know, our sandpaper flat, so we could actually just lift it into the, which we might do later, right? You know, this is step one. This is kind of like a trial run, so to speak. Okay, so I've got our block of wood, I've got our sandpaper, and I've got our drill. Now I'm left-handed, so I'm going to hold the sandpaper with my right hand, and I'm going to hold the drill with my left hand because it's a little stronger. The process here is pretty simple, right? We're going to spin our drill, we're going to put our sandpaper against our block, and we're going to just sand it until we feel comfortable. We're probably going to roll through a couple pieces of sandpaper here. I'm starting with 60, you know, a nice rough sandpaper that can get all the burrs knocked off and all the rough stuff out of here. That's step one, is getting all of our roughness gone. Once our roughness is gone, we're going to probably take a piece of 120 or maybe 220 and smooth it off so it's a little cleaner and a little safer to touch, right? A little smoother overall. So let's take our sandpaper and our drill and see how we do. If I was smart, I'd be wearing gloves, but I'm not smart. Nobody's ever accused me of being smart, right? So if you look, you're going to see a lot of dust rolling off this guy. You know, obviously as we sand it, we have a whole lot of dust. That tells us that our process is kind of working here, and we can kind of feel that it's already gotten a little smoother. You know, this is, my hands are covered and my shirt is covered. This is, it would have been a little easier if we had a wood turner, but I probably should have worn a mask. Because we don't, we're doing what we can with what we got. You know, unless you want to go out and buy a wood turner and just have to store it somewhere just to make, you know, in our case, probably what's going to end up being maybe 4 wheels if I remember right. I don't remember. I have a count somewhere. You know, if we're going to just make a couple small things with it, I don't see the need to have to go get a big tool for that. So the next thing I want to do is I want to knock the corners down a little bit so that they're not super sharp, because we've got some burrs that hang off of them as well. You know, again, the process for that, I'm going to swap around our sandpaper. I'm going to pick a little fresher patch because I want to get a little more cutting in here. But the concept there is just to kind of knock them down, deburr them to get, you know, any splinters out of there, kind of clean it up a little bit. So with that, here it's not as important to use a block, but I'm still gonna, because I think it is a little more helpful for me rather than putting my fingers up in here and risking, you know, the wood coming through one of these holes and grabbing my fingers. I'm gonna use the block because it's a little safer. Again, we might see a little dust coming off of here. You know, it's because it just tells us that it's working, right? I mean, if you've ever sanded anything, you know that that's how that works. Ooh, look at that. We got a nice angle cut on the edge of our wheel. This is good. I like this. I could flip it around, but our wheel is big enough. I think I can get in here pretty well, or I might actually get in on the other side, swap my hands real quick and use my left hand to stabilize the sandpaper. Yeah, that's working out pretty well. Now the next thing I can do is I can try and round it a little bit. Feel it. Yeah, that feels nice. Let's round the front side that we did already. So now we've got we've roughly rounded our wheels. See, we kind of ripped a chunk up here off the sandpaper. That's why I don't want to put my fingers down there, because that wood was sharp, because it was a rough cut with our hole saw. So now that we've got kind of a little bit of smoothness on our wheel, just enough to kind of knock everything down and flatten it out, I'm going to swap out. I have a toolbox down here with more sandpaper in it. I'm going to swap out for a sheet of 120. I don't necessarily need to step down that slow, but I'm gonna, because it'll give us a little more time to play with the thought that we've got going here. So we're gonna flatten this all out. You know, we're gonna hit the whole corner again. Actually, I'm gonna flip around because we found that worked pretty well. We're gonna do this whole surface here. We're gonna focus primarily on the corners with this, because we want to knock. You know, I can still feel there's a little bit of sharpness here. I want to knock that down. I want to clean that up. This is where it splintered real bad when I drilled the hole. What I should have done is gone halfway through one side and then up the other side so it didn't splinter on the edges. But I didn't know I was going to make a wheel out of that when I cut it out. It was just a piece of scrap wood, and I decided later. So here, again, we're just going to take our block and we're going to run our sandpaper around it. We see we're still getting a lot of dust, which means we're still cutting pretty well. You know, the process here, I usually sand them a lot longer than this. I don't usually just do, you know, a quick 2-3 minute spin on it like that. You know, I might actually reverse this so I throw my sawdust onto the floor instead of into my camera that I don't necessarily want to ruin. I would normally sand this for probably 10 or 15 minutes. We're not going to go that hard on it because it's not particularly important. We're just going to smooth it out and show how, even if we don't have, you know, I don't have the ideal tool to do this job, right? But we can still get it done. You know, that's the cool thing about some of these more modern tools, is that they can be very general purpose. In this case, I have found that getting a good drill that has, you know, a few features on it that might cost a little more saves me down the road, because we can stand here and we can do what would require an expensive wood turning machine for something that we don't really need that much precision for. Next, I think this is my 220. So we're going to take that, we're going to run down our wheel again. And again, I would spend more time on it. We're just going for a rough wheel here. This is actually already pretty smooth. If we wanted to, we could actually seal this afterwards. I have sealer that I might spray this with just so that it's, nice and, relatively watertight for us. But, I'll decide that later. It's not a big deal, but you can if you want. So let's go ahead and see how... We see we're still moving a lot of sawdust. Now I could turn this down. I could turn the speed of the drill down, but I'm not super worried about it. Yeah, that's nice. See, the other thing that happened when we reverse direction is, as you sand, you change the direction of the wood, right? So if we're rotating the wood, in this case, counterclockwise, we create little burrs, kind of like when you shave your face, your legs, or anything. You end up with everything pointing down the opposite direction. So by switching, we knocked all the burrs down. We didn't just flatten them, we actually allowed it to cut them off. So here we actually have a pretty nice looking wheel. So we're going to dismount this and we're going to take a look at it. Okay, so we've taken our wheel out. And looking at it here, this is a pretty fine looking wheel, if I do say so myself. I mean, yeah, I'm a little biased because, I did it. But I gotta say, given the situation we found ourselves in, I don't really have too many complaints about this, except that maybe I've got a little splintering that still wants to happen on that back side. What I might do, off the air is spin this again, but flip the bolt around so that I've got this, dirty side on the outside. Because if we look here, our front side looks pretty good. We have a nice smooth edge all the way around here. You can run your finger around it without feeling like you're going to cut yourself. The next step might be, we could take like some kind of an enamel or epoxy and, fill this in. Sorry, it's a little cold in here, so my nose is running. We could fill this in, make it look real good, but I'm not too concerned for what we're going to use. But we could coat it, right? And then we would have a nice coated, hardened wheel that would be great for using on, like, if you were making a little, cart to play with your kids or something. This would be a great wheel for it, right? In our case, I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is loosen the bolt up so we can see. I'm going to play with it a minute, right? Because I'm a child at heart. And I want to roll it on something and just kind of get a feel for, ooh, that's smooth. Wow. That's moderately impressive. I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to do for a bearing through one of these, but now that I see how this works, I might just double another nut up here, tighten the two nuts against each other so that they don't move, and just use a 1224. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with actually how that worked. Yeah, that's smooth. So, we have done something here. We've made a wheel. We have reinvented the wheel, and we've done it with really minimal tooling. We don't have all the fancy stuff that big shops would have that are making these. Well, at least I don't. You might. If you do, great, good for you. I don't. I have my drills, my sanders. I got a table saw and stuff. I've got a decent amount of junk. Well, tools, but I don't have anything fancy that I could use to, do something like this, right? This is pretty impressive given what I've got going for me. So I gotta say, overall, all things considered, for the amount of work and time it took, I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, I might, later I might play with this one a little more. Now that I think about it and I want to make a couple more wheels, I'll use my my hole saw a little better. And when I drill it, I'll drill it halfway, which, boy, this doesn't look like this hole's in the center very well, does it? Anyway, I would drill it halfway, and then I would flip it around the board, and I would do it again. Maybe my hole saw's not centered. Yeah, it does it. It's always the same side it's trying to lean towards. That's okay. One of the other things we did by turning it like that is if the hole wasn't quite centered, if this wasn't the exact center of the wheel, if we spin it long enough in the sander, it will be, because our sanding will naturally be heavier on the side that's further from the center, because that side's going to cut into it. and then it'll naturally be lighter on the other side. If I had built a jig that we could hold our sandpaper to constant point, we could actually take a relatively unclean wheel that was, oblong or misshapen, and we could actually clean it up pretty well. With a wood turning machine, I could put a square block in there, and with enough work, I could turn that into a wheel. So, our technique has some of the same advantages and benefits that the higher end machinery does, but without all that extra cost, right? Okay, so that's kind of the end of this episode. I don't know what I'm going to do format-wise yet. If you want to find out, I guess stay tuned, and we'll find out. This is something that kind of my plan was pretty haphazard, I'll admit. But I do have a part of a plan. I have like 15% of a plan, right? So in the future, I think I'm actually going to write down what I want to say so I don't ramble as much and I don't say as much, just because, it's a bad habit, right? There I go doing it again. But what I did want to do is kind of kick this off in my head, because to me the hardest part is kind of doing the very first one, right? Getting in the groove. This should be something that like I said, I've got a list of things I want to do. So I should be able to kind of get into more of a habit of this and doing more of it. We've got a lot of stuff I want to cover, some of which are sitting on the bench that this tripod is sitting on right now. They're halfway assembled or something. So, there's a good chunk of stuff that I want to cover. And to do that, I think, I was thinking that they would each be a single episode, but given how long that took us, the wheel, I think kind of mentally in my head, I think I might make them, more of a series of episodes, 2 or 3 episodes that, I don't know, we'll find out, right? It's an evolving concept. Eventually I got to get my buddy Mike to make me a shirt that actually has my company logo on it so I can look all cool, right? Mike. Yeah. So I guess that's it. If you watched this whole thing, which I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but if you did, I guess let me know what you think. I'm curious. Let me know if there's stuff you'd want to see. I've got my list, but that doesn't necessarily mean anybody else wants me to do anything on my list. If there's stuff you'd like to watch me experiment with and fail, probably. Failure is, a good amount of what I do. Let me know, I guess. Let me know if you like or dislike anything about it. Let me know if you like or dislike the format, if there's a different type of format you'd want me to try, if you don't like what I do with my hands, right? Because I make hand gestures, but then like with the camera, they're always out of frame, so I might have to adjust that. I'm going to be playing with stuff, right? I don't have all this figured out yet. What I do know is what I want to achieve in the end, which is kind of a series of stuff that, are fun little projects that, if you have kids, you might want to do with them. If you don't, you might want to do yourself. You might want to play with tools you have and are like, well, I've got this cool thing. I don't know what to do with it. I have no projects I can use it on. I don't know what I can do with it, right? I'm going to try and, cover things like that and create relatively unique concepts here. We're also going to do, this actually started with a different experiment I want to do. I'm not going to say what it is right now because I want it to be a surprise. But to do that experiment, I've got to build a thing. Now I've got all the supplies here to build the thing. I just have to do it. And when I started working on it, which I did, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I recorded how to build the thing as part of the project, right? So now that spiraled into a whole ordeal, and I'm just like rambling again, but I'm going to try to do fun things that might require us to do not so fun things like create a bunch of wheels. Do I need to? Not necessarily, because I have a box with 100 casters in it over in the corner, but casters are not the same. This can do things that the caster can't. Particularly, one of the things I want to do requires us to take one of these, mount it horizontally, and then bolt something to the top of it that we can spin. I I don't want to ruin a caster, and I don't know how I would do that with a caster because I can't really mount a caster in the same way. So, we have our wheel, which is going to be, I hate to sound cliche, but a rather large foundation of the work we want to do in the future. You know, now that we've done one, we could actually do a second one, and we could, you know, like you could make a thing to shoot baseballs out of this, right? I mean, it wouldn't be very efficient because they're wood wheels. You know, they use rubber wheels or probably polyurethane wheels at this point, you know, shoot the pitching machines. But like, we could, right? We could try it. We could see what happens. We could actually, with 3 of these, we could make a bender, right? To bend metal, to shape it into a nice hemispherical piece, right? And the way you do that is you actually mount 2 wheels, then you put a 3rd one in the middle, and you gradually tighten it so that it causes the part to bend, and you roll the part back and forth through there a lot. And you know, that's how we bend tube or flat or sheet steel or something like that, or one of the ways we can. There's others. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is we have a foundation, a part that can be a foundation for future work. And that to me is something. Or at the very least, it's not nothing. And that's also something.